Hey friends, my name is Becca and I am so glad that you are here. If you are new to this channel, super big welcome. We focus on all things middle grade literature here, specifically the first chapters of your favorite middle grade novels. Today, we've got Dan Gemeinhart's newest novel, Coyote Lost and Found, which is the sequel to The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise, which was so loved by so many readers. So I am particularly really excited to read this first chapter, and I'm reading it for the first time right along with you. Dan Gemeinhart is just such a phenomenal author. He has written so many great books. Highly recommend, if you haven't read his novels, that you check him out. We're going to start by reading the front and side cover to get a little bit of an idea what this book is going to be about. It's been almost a year since Coyote and her dad left the road behind and settled down in a small Oregon town. Time she spent grieving the loss of her mom and sisters and trying to fit in at a new school. But just as life is becoming a new version of normal, Coyote discovers a box containing her mom's ashes, and she thinks she might finally be ready to say goodbye. So Coyote and her dad gear up for an epic cross-country road trip to scatter the ashes at her mom's chosen resting place. The only problem? Coyote has no idea where that resting place is. And the secret's hidden in a book that Coyote mistakenly sold last year somewhere in the country. Now it's up to Coyote to track down the treasured book without her dad ever finding out that it's lost. It's time to fire up their trusty bus Jaeger, pick up some old friends, discover some new ones, and hit the road with another unforgettable adventure. All right, and without further ado, let's dive right on in to that first chapter. Sometimes stories start with a bang, and sometimes stories start with a whisper. And sometimes stories start with a robbery, or a car chase, or a fist fight, or someone being born, or someone dying. Sometimes stories start with a kitten. I mean, the funny thing about stories is that they don't really start or stop at all. It's just the telling that starts or stops. And this story, it could start when me and my dad finally settled down for a bit and got off the road and into a house. Or it could begin when I started real school for the first time in 5 years. Or heck, it could start 6 years before that, when something terrible happened that tore a hole in the universe, or at least felt like it did. But nah, I think this story starts with me on a bus finding a box. Now, the bus wasn't moving at the time, and no, the box wasn't a buried memory box. That's a whole different story. In this particular case, the bus was parked next to a house in Oregon that I happened to be living in, and the box held something almost as precious as memories. So there you go. Once upon a time, I was hanging out alone on an old bus, and I was bored. The bus was named Jaeger. It could be some folks don't see the need to name a bus. Then again, some folks haven't had the chance to get to know a bus as well as I have. Heck, me and my dad, who I'll mostly just call Rodeo since that's what he likes to be called, had lived on that old bus for 5 years after that hole got torn in the universe. We'd taken out all the seats, except for the first couple of rows, and bolted in a couch and some shelves and a big chair, and we called the throne. And I even had a room in the back with a bed and a curtain for a door and everything. Jaeger was weird, and Jaeger was funky, and Jaeger got looks everywhere we went. But Jaeger was home. Even though I was the only one who'd really wanted to settle down and stop living on Jaeger in the first place, once we finally stopped rambling and had an actual house that didn't have wheels, it turns out I still wanted to hang out on that bus a lot of the time. So I'd run an extension cord out to it and strung pretty white Christmas lights all up inside it, and it was kind of my home away from home, except it was parked right next to my home, so it wasn't really all that away. On the particular March Sunday when this story started, I was laying there on a couch in the bus, half reading a book. My cat, Ivan, was laying warm on my chest, purring while I scratched behind his ears. I shook my head and let the book drop to the ground beside me and tisked my tongue. "It's no good, bud," I said. Ivan opened his eyes and looked into mine. Ivan is perfect in nearly every way, but one of his best perfections is how good of a listener he is. This book is perfectly fine, but there are way too many flat-out amazing books in the world to waste time reading a perfectly fine one, right? Ivan yawned in agreement. I sighed and looked around. It would have been a great day to have a friend over. If, I had any friends. Not counting cats. But I didn't, not counting cats. I saw Rodeo's bookshelf a little ways away, so I scooted Ivan down off me and ambled over to take a look. I knelt down, squinting at the titles, hoping something would grab me. The Little Prince was pretty great, but I'd read that already. Same thing with The Old Man and the Sea, and I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Ivan sidled up beside me, rubbing on my hip, tail held high. I eyed a tattered paperback book of poetry by Khalil Gibran. I'd read some of it and dug it enough, but I wasn't sure I was in the mood for poetry just then. I went and grabbed it anyway, but as I did, Ivan rubbed hard on my elbow with his chin, and my hand went crooked, and instead of grabbing the book, I knocked it back. It fell with a muffled thump into the darkness between the shelf and the wall of the bus. "Crud," I said, leaning forward and turning sideways to reach blindly with one hand behind the shelf. Ivan came in close to my face, purring. "Stay out of this, cat," I said, grunting. My finger brushed against what I was pretty sure was the spine of the book, and I stuck my tongue out and stretched farther and grabbed. But my fingers didn't close around a book. It was something else. It had corners and edges, but it was bigger and heavier than a paperback. I gripped it harder and pulled it up just before it slipped from my fingers with a solid thud. I sat back on my knees and slid the thing towards me into the light. It was a box that looked like a briefcase without a handle, made of dark wood with tarnished metal at the corners, just small enough to fit in that hidden space behind the shelf, but big enough that Ivan could have curled up inside it if it was open, which I'm sure is 100% what he would have tried to do. I sat there for a second, looking at the box. It had a feeling to it. It felt secret. It felt hidden. It felt important. It felt, to be honest, like a once upon a time. And there was this fact. Jaeger was not that big, and it had been my home for 5 years. I'd lived and breathed and slept and woke and eaten and laughed and cried in the cozy space between those 4 walls, and I'd never seen that box before. So it was secret. It was hidden. And it sure as heck wasn't my secret, which meant it had to be Rodeo's. And Rodeo's a lot of things, but Secret Keeper ain't really one of them. He was the type to brag about how productive a trip to the bathroom had been. What kind of secret would a fella like that keep from a girl like me? Ivan rubbed his chin against the corner of the box, the way cats do. "Shoo," I said, but my heart wasn't in it. I spun that box around and found 2 latches snapped shut. I swallowed. Opening up those latches was surely a step there'd be no coming back from. Funny how life does that sometimes. Gives you a little warning, whispers a little promise. "What do you think, Ivan?" I asked in a hushed voice. "Meow," Ivan said. He's not a big talker. "Okay," I said. I bit my lip. "If you say so." I snapped open one of the latches. Ivan's ears perked at the click. Holding my breath, I undid the second one. The box sat there, one big unanswered question. All that was left was to lift the lid. I took hold of the dusty wood with both hands, and I raised it up. The soft yellow glow of Christmas lights filtered down into the box. The box was mostly full, and what it was mostly full of was gritty, gray dust. I frowned, just for just a second. It took me a second to realize it wasn't dust in the secret box. It was ash. What in? I started to whisper, but then it hit me. And I knew. I just knew. Goosebumps sprang down my arms. A lump grew, dull and sharp at the same time, in my throat. I blinked, then again, against the sudden heat in my eyes. "Oh," I whispered. "Hi, Mom." Okay, that's the end of chapter 1, now that we're all crying. If you enjoyed this first chapter Friday Read Aloud, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, friends, happy reading.